In the last part of lesson 3.5, we're going to do some evaluating of functions. Now, we're going to do actually two things. So, evaluating a function is basically akin to what we did way back in lesson 1.2, where we were plugging in various numbers in for variables. That's basically what evaluating functions means. So we're going to plug in various inputs. Let me zoom in a little bit. There we go. We're going to plug in various inputs and we're going to plug in various outputs and then solve. So we have two main questions. One is going to be phrased this way. Example 1, given a function, what is f of 2? Now what that means is, what are we going to get as an output when we plug in the number 2 as our input? So if we start with this function, f of 2 means I'm going to plug in 2 everywhere I see an x. And my output is what we're going to get when I calculate this formula here. Again, remember f of 2, those parentheses mean of 2. So f of 2 is what I get when I evaluate 3 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 1. So calculate that all out. 3 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 1. And we end up with a 15. Now, just as a note, when you write your answer, you can write it this way. F of 2 is equal to 15. And we saw in the last video that this notation means that you plug in a 2 as your input and you get out a 15 as your output. So when we have a formula, we can do this. When we have a formula, we can plug in various numbers in for our x, and we can find the outputs by just replacing each variable x with the number 2. Now, obviously, when we do that, we put that in parentheses like we always do and evaluate. So that's one type of problem. That's the type of problem that you've probably seen, that you've dealt with, hopefully in the past. Now, another type of problem goes like this. Given a function, let's say f of x equals 2x plus 5. So this is another different function. If f of x equals 11, what does x equal? So what this is saying is that if you plug in a value for x, the formula says how you're going to calculate your output is you're going to take 2 times x plus 5. And this says, well, what if we got 11 as our output? So what if 2x plus 5 was equal to 11? What input, what number would we have had to have plugged in? Well, in order to solve this, all we have to do is set 2x plus 5 equal to 11. Now, they put it as 2x plus 5 equals to 11. They put the 11 on the left. You could put the 11 on the right. It doesn't matter. But 2x plus 5 equals 11. Subtract 5 from both sides. Then divide by 2. And you get x is equal to 3. And so what you're saying in that case, since we found 2x plus 5 equals 11 gave us an x equals 3, what you're really saying is that if you take your function and you input a 3, you're going to get out an 11. All right. So basically what we did is we started with the output and we found what the input had to be. In our last problem, we started with the input and we found what the output had to be. So be really, really careful about reading these things. What is f of 2? That's giving us our input. What does x equal? That's asking us to find our input. So be really, really careful when you read these problems. Now, what I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to push pause and try the cooperative group problems on page 172 of the course packet. Push pause on the video, and then when you come back, I will show how to do all these. All right, so hopefully you went ahead and did that. I am going to start doing these. So problem 1 says, given f of x equals 3x squared plus 4x minus 11, what is f of negative 2? Now, f of negative 2 means that you're given the input of negative 2, so plug it into this formula. So we get 3 times negative 2 squared plus 4 multiplied times negative 2 minus 11. Notice that when I inputted each negative 2, I input it in parentheses. That's what we always do when we input numbers for variables. And this is really important that I type this in inside of parentheses because, as we've seen before, back in lesson 3.2, negative 2 inside of parentheses squared is different than if I don't put parentheses around there. So by the way, you can type this all in one line on your calculator. When I type this all in, I got a negative 7. So what I got is that f of negative 2 is equal to negative 7. All right. So input negative 2, your output is negative 7. There you go. Now the next problem that we deal with is given g of x equals 3x plus 7, if g of x is equal to 1, what does x equal? Well, again, notice that this one is giving me my output, g of x is equal to 1, so the output is 1, and it's asking for the input of x. And so what we do is we say, well, the output, 3x plus 1 formula, would have had to be equal to 1. Or again, output is this formula in general for any x. If our particular value gave us out a 1, then 3x plus 7 had to be equal to 1. Subtract 7 from both sides, we end up with 3x equals negative 6. And then we divide both sides by 3, we'd end up with x equals negative 2. All right, so that means our input would have had to have been negative 2 to get an output of 1. The next question is this one, given f of x equals x squared plus x minus 11, what is f of negative 3? So what we're going to do, f of negative 3, I'm going to plug in a negative 3 everywhere I see an x. Be very careful, once again, that you plug that negative 3 inside of parentheses. If you don't do that, you're going to get a wrong answer. So make sure that negative 3 goes inside of parentheses when you plug it in here and here. Other than that, pretty straightforward. I'm going to type in this entire formula into my calculator. Negative 3 squared. Again, I'm putting the negative 3 inside parentheses. Plus negative 3 minus 11. I got out a negative 5. Now, not every time you're going to have to plug in negative numbers or, positive or whatever, but I got out a negative 5. So there you go. Negative 3 as an input gives you a negative 5 as an output. All right, last problem of the cooperative group problems. We have g of x, which is equal to 5x plus 1. and it says g of x, if g of x is equal to negative 24, what does x equal? So again, this gives you the output. It says g of x is equal to negative 24. I know that the output is always given to me by this formula. So we go 5x plus 1 is equal to negative 24. I would, again, that's because output is equal to output. I would subtract 1 from both sides. That would give me 5x equals negative 25. And then I would divide both sides by the number 5. Negative 25 divided by 5 is negative 5. So what does x equal? Well, x has to equal negative 5. And again, that means that if you input negative 5, you get out a negative 24. And so that is how those types of problems from lesson 3.5 are done. Now, obviously, as you're studying for 3.5, a great way to study is to do all of these at-home practice problems, not just 3.5C, but also 3.5A, 3.5B, and then check your answers in the back of this course packet.